on. I won't bite." Her tone was bright, probably for my sake as well as Ali's. "Come on, Daddy." He climbed out of my arms, took my hand. "I'll show you the way." So I followed them inside. Was this a good idea? I'd never actually been inside before. The house was tastefully cluttered. Several arts and crafts style built-ins overflowed with books and some of Christine's art collection. It was more informal and comfortable looking than her home outside D.C. had been. I was struck by how naturally both of them moved through this space that was so foreign to me. I don't belong here. The kitchen was open, very bright, and smelled of rosemary. A small herb garden thrived on the windowsill. Christine set Alex up with a sippy cup of chocolate milk and then put 2 mugs of steaming coffee on the table between us. "Seattle's drug of choice," she said. "I drink way too much of it. I should switch to decaf in the afternoons or something. Maybe in the mornings," she added with a laugh. "It's good, the coffee. Your house looks great, too." The chit-chattiness was striking in its banality, and almost as uncomfortable as a real conversation might have been right now. I vowed not to ask Christine about the weather, but this was weird for both of us. Little Alex slipped off his chair and came back with his new book. He climbed onto my lap. "Read, okay? Careful, it pops up and eats you." It made for a good distraction, and also put the focus on him, where it was supposed to be. I opened the cover and began. "In the light of the moon, a little egg lay on a leaf." Alex put his head against my chest, and as I felt my voice reverberate into him, my heart melted a little. Christine watched while I read. She smiled, clutching her mug with both hands. What might have been. A couple of minutes later, Alex had to go to the bathroom, and he asked me to go with him. "Please, Daddy?" Christine came over and whispered near my ear. "He's having trouble hitting the toilet bowl with his pee. He's a little embarrassed about it." "Oh," I said. "Fruit Loops. You have any?" Fortunately, Christine had a box, and I took it into the bathroom with Alex. I threw a couple into the bowl. "Here's a cool game," I said. "You have to put your pee right in the middle of a Fruit Loop." He tried, and he did pretty good. Hit the bowl, anyway. I told Christine the trick when we came out, and she smiled and shook her head. Fruit Loops. It's a guy thing, right? Chapter 55. The rest of my day in Seattle was less stressful and a lot more fun. I took little Alex to the aquarium, and it was easy and gratifying to throw myself into the time I had with him. He stared wide-eyed at the tropical fish and made a mess of his chicken fingers and ketchup at the aquarium cafe. For all I cared, we could have spent the day in a bus terminal waiting room. I loved watching him be himself, and also grow up. Every year it got better. Ali, like the Great One. My mind didn't get too weighed down again until we were back at the house that night. Christine and I talked for a while on the front porch. I didn't want to go inside, but I didn't want to leave yet. And if I wasn't imagining it, her eyes were a little red. Ever since I'd known her, she'd had mood swings, but they seemed to be getting worse. "I guess it's my turn to ask if you're all right," I said. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Alex. Just the usual. Trust me, you don't want to hear about my stuff." "Well, if you mean romance, then you're right. But otherwise, go ahead." She laughed. "Romance? No. I'm just a little overextended these days. I do it to myself, always have. I'm working way too hard." I knew she was the new head at a private school nearby. Other than that, I really didn't have a clue what Christine's life looked like anymore. much less why she had been crying before I got back to the house with Alex. "Besides," she said, "we agreed last time I would ask about you. How are you doing? I know it's hard, and I'm sorry for that, for everything that's happened." I told her in the briefest possible terms about the Mary Smith case, Nana's recent dizzy spell, and that Janny and Damon were doing fine. I left Jamila out of the conversation, and she didn't ask. "I've been reading about that terrible murder case in the paper," Christine said. "I hope you're being careful. It surprises me that a woman could be a killer." "I'm always careful," I told her. There was all kinds of irony going on here. Obviously, my job stood for a lot between Christine and me, and none of it was good. "This is all so strange, isn't it?" she said suddenly. "Was it harder than you expected, being here today?" I told her that seeing Alex was worth whatever it took, but that honestly, seeing her was hard too. "We've certainly had easier times than this, haven't we?" she asked. "Yes, just not as parents." She looked at me, and her dark eyes were so intelligent, as they always had been. "That's so sad, Alex, when you put it that way." I shrugged, with nothing to say. She put a tentative hand on my forearm. "I'm sorry, Alex. Really. I hope I'm not being insensitive. I don't know what you're feeling, but I do think I understand the position you're in. I just—" She mustered up her next thought. "I just wonder sometimes what kind of parents we would have made. Together, I mean." That was it. "Christine, you either are being insensitive or you're trying to tell me something." She sighed deeply. "I'm doing this all wrong, as usual. I wasn't going to say anything today, but now I have, so okay. Here it is. I want Alex to have a two-parent life. I want him to know you, and believe it or not, I want you to know him, for everyone's sake, even mine." I took a step back, and her hand fell limply away. "I don't know what to say to that, Christine. I think it's obvious that I wanted the same thing. You're the one who decided to move out here to Seattle." "I know," she said. "That's what I really wanted to speak with you about. I'm thinking of moving back to Virginia. I'm almost sure that's what I'm going to do." My mind, finally, was completely blown. Chapter 56.
Vancouver was one of the storyteller's favorite cities, along with London, Berlin, and Copenhagen. He flew up there on Alaska Air and arrived just in time to wait on a long line with about 500 visitors from Korea and China. Vancouver was crawling with Chinese and Koreans, but that was about the only thing he didn't like about the beautiful Canadian seaport, and it seemed a minor complaint. He had some movie business in town that took up most of the day, and also put him in a dark mood. By 5 or so that night, he was in a wretched state of mind, and he needed to get the bottled-up anger out somehow. Know what I need? To tell somebody what's going on. To share. Maybe not tell everything, but some of it. At least an idea of how incredible this whole thing was. This totally strange period of his life, this wilding, as he'd come to call it, this story. There was this foxy red-haired producer he knew who was in Vancouver to shoot a TV movie. Maybe he should connect with her. Tracy Willett had her own wilding period in Hollywood, starting when she was 18 and continuing into her late 20s. She'd had a kid since and had apparently cooled her jets some. But she kept in touch with them, and that had to mean something. He'd always been able to talk to Tracy, and about almost anything. So he called her, and sure enough, she said she'd love to have dinner and drinks with him. About an hour later, Tracy called back from the movie set. The movie shoot was running late. Not her fault, he knew. Probably some hack director's fault. Some disorganized, arrogant, glorified art director, 2 or 3 years out of film school. So he didn't get to see Tracy until past 11, when she came over to his room at the Marriott. She gave him a big hug and a sloppy kiss, and she looked pretty good for having worked all day. "I missed you, sweet cakes. I missed you so much. Where have you been? You look great, by the way. So thin. Good thin, though. The lean and hungry look, right? It suits you." He didn't know whether Tracy was still into blow or booze or whatever, so he had a little of everything on hand. And that's what they did. Just about everything. He knew right away she wanted to fool around because she told him she was horny for one of the stuntmen on the movie, and because of the way she sat on the couch, legs set apart, looking him up and down with those bedroom eyes of hers, hungry eyes, just as he remembered. Finally, Tracy pulled up her top and said, "Well?" So he took her to bed, where she complimented his new lean body again. Tracy did a little more coke, and she took off her blouse to let him admire her tits some more. He remembered the drill with Tracy. He had to talk about how sexy she was and touch her everywhere for about 20 minutes. Then at least 30 minutes of very energetic humping, because Tracy couldn't have an orgasm to save her life, and was always getting so close, but never quite there. So keep going. Harder, faster, oh, baby, baby, baby. And when he came inside her, she seemed to like it, and she held him close as if they were a couple again, even though they had never really been a couple. Once the sexual preliminaries were out of the way, it was his turn to really get off. They were out on his terrace overlooking the city, and Tracy had her head on his shoulder. Very romantic and cute, in a pathetic sort of way, like going on a date with Meg Ryan, or Daryl Hannah, maybe. "I'm going to tell you a little about what I've been up to," he finally said. Until then, everything had been about her. "I want to hear all about it, sweetie. Only I can't leave the kid too late back in my hotel. The nanny threatens to quit." Now that he remembered, Tracy was kind of a selfish bitch most of the time. "Does anybody know about the two of us tonight?" he asked. "No, duh. So what are you up to?" "Something big, of course. You're due." "Yeah, it's kind of a mystery thing. It's big, all right. Really different, though. Nothing anything like it before. I'm writing the story myself. The story of stories." "Wow, that's great. You're writing it yourself, huh?" "Yeah. You know those murders in L.A.? Mary Smith?" She knew a little, but not everything, since she'd been up in Vancouver for 4 weeks, so he quickly filled her in. "You bought the rights? Wow, that's great! And what, you want me to produce?" He shook his head in disbelief. "From who, Tracy? Who would I buy the rights from?" "Oh, right. Well, so what's the deal then?" "So I can talk to you? Really talk?" "Of course you can talk to me. Tell me your big idea, your story. I love thrillers." "This is it. Go or no go. What's it going to be?" "I planned those murders, Tracy. I'm Mary." Wow. It was out. Just like that. I'm Mary. Holy shit. She looked at him real funny. Funny peculiar. And suddenly he knew this had been a very bad idea. And old Tracy wasn't the crazy one. He was. He'd just blown his whole deal. And for what? To let off a little steam with an old girlfriend? To vent? Confess? She was staring at him as if he had 2 heads. At least that many. "Come again? What are you saying?" He laughed. Faked it the best he could, anyway. "It's a joke, Trace. We're high. I made a joke." "Hey, let me give you a ride home. You've got the kid at your hotel, the nanny and whatever. I hear you. And you're a good mommy, right?"
Chapter 57.
They didn't talk much in the car, so he knew how big a mistake he'd made. And now he wondered if he'd made other mistakes along the way. Maybe important ones that would get him caught. Like way back in New York City, the movie theater shootings. "I've been under a lot of stress lately, you know?" he finally spoke. She muttered, "Sure, I hear you." Man.